Yes, yes. Because when you're putting a painting together like a piece of music, there are broad brushes with shapes, big shapes. Any art, real art, is a human condition. It's about expressing or telling a story, pointing to the moon. It's not the moon, it's the pointing.
This whole thing started when you gave me a painting. So I saw the octopus. So originally this piece was called Octopus. And then I thought, later, I thought it doesn't give enough justice to you. So I wanted to rename it into Luke's painting.
Elena's music takes me straight to the creative process in its most raw form. It comes straight out of her sideways. And as she says over and over, she can never repeat herself. It just comes out of her almost in a bodily way. It relates very strongly to my ideas or my feelings about painting. It's like an artist making one painting after another. You know that it's got the same format, it's got the same perhaps subject. So I could be in my studio painting the same subject for months and months and months and never get bored of it, because there's always the craft and the instruments and the materials itself.
Luke Sciberras is a contemporary Australian artist who was born and raised in Campbelltown in Western Sydney and had a proclivity for art from a very early age, and was associated with the Wedderburn community and artists such as Elizabeth Cummings. And Wedderburn is an unofficial Australian artist colony. The connection to Hill End and Bathurst is that Luke Sciberras has been based in Hill End, another unofficial Australian artist colony, for the last 20 years. So Wedderburn and Campbelltown, Bathurst and Hill End really bookend Luke Sciberras's life and career to date.
My whole day's work, day in and day out, is coming down to the studio first thing in the morning and working and painting. When I'm in the studio, the paintings take on their own life and I respond to that. There's a dialogue that I've always been totally enchanted by. When I'm making a painting, that you put one thing in and it changes the whole painting. And you change that one thing and that changes the whole painting again. Landscape painting now is seen much more as a personal expression. What more and more I think people are looking for is a spiritual response to the landscape, and also the physical quality of painting. People find an appeal to the actual applied mark. They'd like to see the artist's own inflection in the actual making of a painting.
Luke spent his formative years in Campbelltown, and he was coming out to Wedderburn, and he came across this group of artists who were living here quite close quarters, had their individual studios. He ended up spending a lot of time with Elizabeth Cummings, and he was paying her $10 an hour for drawing lessons.
He certainly was developing an eye. Luke has an amazing eye, and so he was acquiring his knowledge, his interest in painting, a real passion for art, and so he was very open to everything.
Luke also lived here in Wedderburn with the abstract artist John Peart for about 3 years, and Luke worked as a studio assistant, stretching canvas and cleaning brushes. And Luke mentions that from John he really learnt that dedication to being a painter and being an artist.
At that stage I wanted to be an abstract painter, so I was wrestling with the idea of abstraction, but it never really sat comfortably with me. I never really believed that you could make a painting that was just out of my imagination. I don't have the imagination to be an abstract painter. I need a source, I need a subject. So I just surrendered to that. I just said, well, I just have to paint what I love most, and that's nature. Living in close proximity to nature has always been a very important part of my life, not just my work, but my life. Everything is in the landscape for me, and that's been a huge part of my life, as long as I can remember. But back growing up in Wedderburn and surrounds of Campbelltown, I was always in the bush, always running around, a total nature boy. This is far from a natural environment. It's actually been sluiced and gouged and scored and sifted through for gold over many, many years. But then there's this fabulous arrival of nature taking over again. And so you see there are large trees growing in the depth of this creek. At the same time, there are trees up here above us. Roots are entirely exposed, so you can see that you're way below the natural ground level. And so you're looking up at a landscape. To see the landscape from this angle is very strange. It has a perennial appeal for me.
The title of the exhibition is Side of the Sky. Side of the Sky is a phrase taken from a Tom Waits song, and Luke speaks about the title flipping the traditional horizontal Australian landscape. If you look at his work, probably his more recent work, you will notice that there's always something that'll like jut up against the sky, be it a mountain range, the dust storm, thundercloud, trees, a lot of different things. You'll see sort of framing the sky. But Luke also speaks about, sometimes when you're lying down, or if you're driving a car, driving out of Hilland, or driving into Hilland, you're kind of swallowed by the landscape at different points in time. Like it juts up around you and it pushes up into the sky. So I think that there's a lot of things that have fed into him being drawn to this.
His work moves from literalism, just painting what's actually there, through to abstraction. But there's always the figures underneath, and a lot of his works are quite abstract in their construction, which is interesting because you can still see the landscape, but it's an impression of the landscape. He's probably one of the most travelled artists that I've ever encountered, and I think the travelling around Australia and going everywhere is because he loves landscape.
I go to new places to learn, and I love the thrill of throwing yourself and immersing yourself in a landscape that you've never seen before. Whatever it is, there's a sense of learning that is only resolved by huge amounts of observation and study and study and study. Gallipoli, for example, I almost had painter's block when I first got there. Everyone immediately not only falls for the drama of the landscape, but also is touched by the unbelievable story of what happened here, which I'm learning about on a very steep learning curve. The materials I've brought with me on this trip really are all just acrylics and gouaches and a mixture of materials, and some dry, some wet, charcoals, pastels. All the grounds of these paintings around me are drizzled on with this brush, this local brush, which I'm finding has a lovely touch, and it's a rough, doesn't pull any punches, it's just a piece of shit. But it's getting me out of, and it also extends my reach, so it's very, very long, which is probably one of the longest small brushes I've ever used, which is great. But it kind of has a nice kind of explosion on the end of it.
For Luke, the landscape of Gallipoli isn't just the landscape of Gallipoli, it's telling a story of sacrifice and warfare and what happened in that place.
Well, this is a painting called Fish in a Barrel because I was just about to head off to the outback for a big road trip, and I'd been working on these Gallipoli paintings pretty intensely in the studio, and I was describing to someone the story of what happened at Gallipoli, and I said it was the Turks were shooting the Australians like fish in a barrel. It struck me just the term fish in a barrel was a great name for a painting. When I arrived on the bank of the Darling River, there I was about to start work, and the whole bank of the river was completely strewn, like a battlefield, if you like, with these incredible carcasses of carp fish all up and down the river. And I realised all of a sudden, of course, there it was. There were the models for this painting that I was about to embark upon. Again, a species in the wrong landscape, a displaced figure in an unforgiving environment, just as the soldiers were over there in Turkey. It's become one of the seminal pieces in this series for me, Fish in a Barrel. Wherever we go, We have a way of writing postcards to ourselves. Conversely, we're drawn to places that we know we have a connection to.
We have a small section of works from Belle-Île, which is an island off the coast of Brittany, where John Peter Russell, the Australian Impressionist, went. And he went there, and I think he's going back and looking at where we come from as Australians and how Australians overseas are very important.
John Peter Russell is one of the great painters, one of the great Australian artists that no one's ever heard of. Russell's palette and his use of paint changed the way we look at painting. It changed the way Matisse looked at painting. He cracked it open in a way that no one could ever look back. It was a huge turning point. Russell has always been important to me from the very first moments I started looking at painting. I come at a painting primarily and firstly with colour, and I observe what's happening in any landscape and my response to it with colour.
It's an intense process, and it's interesting that he does all of that work in the field, but then he comes back to Hill End and he has that time of isolation and focus in his studio in Hill End. And I think that that's a really important part of why he has chosen to live in that place. It's a sanctuary in many ways for him to come back to from his travels.
That's where I put the paint every day. Put it on and take it off. And I guess that's about 15 years worth of putting the same colour in the same place every day. And there are a few tools and things that get lost in there every now and again. Oil sticks and stuff. It's a bit of a archaeological dig to get it all out. My studio has always been the only place that I've ever had, ever in my life, that is just for me. And I require people to respect it. So my studio is surrounded by signs that say, do not visit. This means you, really you, private, private, private.
His art is a culmination of years of experience in the landscape. I'm particularly interested in those landscapes that are in the northwest of Australia. I think are just marvellous, with the baobab trees, the crankiness of those trees, that he brings out an anger almost in the trees that are so beautiful. He's also a man that's poetic, gentle, vulnerable, recognises beauty and lives with beauty.
My source of inspiration, my observation of not only nature but the nature of things will never end as long as my body and eyes work and mind. I'll never tire of it. It'll never bore me. Because it's always different. It's always changing every day, even every single day from morning to the afternoon. And in the middle of the day, it's always different. The weather changes, the light changes. It's what I do. It's what I do is just look. And it's like putting my handprint down on paper, and that's me.